Welcome to the Pursuit of Learning podcast. I'm your host, Clint Murphy. My goal is for each of us to grow personally, professionally, and financially, one conversation at a time. To do that, we will have conversations with subject matter experts across a variety of modalities. My job as your host will be to dig out those golden nuggets of wisdom that will facilitate our growth. Join me on this pursuit. On today's episode, I had Dr. Calvin Tham. As usual, it was a wide-ranging conversation, and some of the aspects of the conversation that I enjoyed were Calvin's experience growing up as a Chinese Canadian and the experience he had of the clash at times between two different cultures. We talked about dentistry and entrepreneurship. Calvin has been a small business owner for the last 19 years. The importance that relationships play in business and in life. We talked parenting, divorce, self-development, coaching, the mourning process. I enjoyed this conversation thoroughly, and I hope you do too. Calvin Tham, welcome to the Pursuit of Learning podcast. It's great to have you here tonight.
Thanks, Clint. Happy to be invited.
So my first question for you is something that I've been wondering for a while, and I had never actually asked you, is you've been a practicing dentist now since 2002 when you graduated from UBC. My first question is, when in life did you actually realize that you wanted to be a dentist?
That's the typical question that you get asked in the dental school interviews is why you want to become a dentist. Let's see. Oddly enough, I guess growing up in an Asian family, although it's never been said, you're always given a sense of expectations to achieve a lot in school. Growing up, the equation was always go to school, get good grades, get into university, get a good job, earn a good income, take care of your family. That's sort of the equation of life that, although not necessarily spoken, was just what you understood growing up in a Chinese family. And I guess that was probably what self-motivated me through my earlier years. I wouldn't call my parents like tiger parents. They never like pushed me, or they never got upset at me if I got bad grades or anything like that. It was more of, if anything, I was afraid to get bad grades because I didn't know what would happen. So it was never really spoken. It was never overt when it came to academic success, but it was sort of always there. So I think when you're in high school, you do those aptitude tests and you get like a few sort of different scenarios of which career paths that could work for you. My mom herself was an accountant, and I was always, pretty good at mathematics. So numbers interested me. So that was always a viable option for me. I always enjoyed science. So somewhere in the science field, whether it became research-based or it leaned towards, medicine of some form, was probably another big avenue. And somewhere along the way, I also enjoyed teaching. I just, the idea of being able to help others achieve their goals in learning and in achieving different things was something that always appealed to me as well. So I think that sort of was kind of what sort of set the basis of what would happen in university. So when I got to university, when you get to first year science and you talk to all your classmates, everybody's pre-med this, pre-med that. And to be honest, I wasn't even really sure if I was pre-med or not. I enjoyed science. I enjoyed biology. The idea of becoming a doctor or something in the realm of medicine was always something that was interesting, but I didn't really know for sure. Somewhere along the way, I think somebody had said, hey, what about dentistry? Dentistry is still within the realm of medicine. And so I started to look into it a little bit more. I actually spent one summer working at my dentist's office. So I basically helped around with whatever needed to be helped. So I would clean the office. I would help the dental assistant with sterilization of instruments. On the rare occasion, if she was busy and the dentist needed assisting, I'd help him. I'd help out front in the reception, whether it be taking payments, answering phone calls, making appointments, taking payments, submitting insurance claims. Those were all things that I kind of learned and picked up that summer, which I was super grateful for because it kind of stirred something within me that I realized, hey, I think that I can make a career of this. This is something that interested me. I liked the idea of getting to know patients. You see patients over and over again, and the ones that you get along with really well, they almost become kind of like the extended part of your family, like your cousins that you don't see all the time, but you see a few times a year, and you always get along and have great conversations with. I kind of look at it that way when I see patients. So I think the idea that it's just being able to connect with people interested me. And I'll be honest with you, I don't even remember the TV show ER back in the 90s.
I definitely do. Noah Wiley was one of my favorites.
So watching what Carter, the character Carter, went through as a resident scared the heck out of me. Dealing with death and dying and having all sorts of this crazy stuff happen to me, it made me realize I did not want to be a doctor. I did not want to be a resident. I didn't want to stay up those crazy hours doing what the doctors do. Like, kudos to the doctors in terms of the number of years of residency and fellowship and just the physical, mental fortitude that they need to be able to do what they do. It's amazing. I realized that just wasn't my cup of tea. It's not something I wanted. I like the idea that within dentistry, you have a little bit more control over your working hours. You can kind of have a little bit of a pick and choose in terms of, working as much as you want or working a little bit less if you wanted to. And the idea that, at some point you could become your own boss and run your own business, that was also an interest for me. So I guess, to make a long story short, in terms of why dentistry, it was sort of like a lot of things that kind of came together that sort of made sense to me. And as I kind of got into it and I got into dental school, I, continued to enjoy it. And yeah, I continue to enjoy it to this day after, this will be my 19th year. So it doesn't feel that way. For sure, I didn't, when it's like, feels like a blink of an eye and it's almost been 2 decades of dentistry, but I definitely, that I don't feel it. If anything, I almost feel like this is sort of the prime of my career, if anything.
There was a lot that we're going to unpack throughout our conversation that you hinted on in that answer, and I love that. The first thing we're going to do, we're going to take a step backwards, because one of the things you talked about that somewhat led to that path was the expectations as a Chinese child. Even though you were in Canada,
Yeah.
you were still being parented with that style. And you've talked to me before about a bit of a challenge that you had growing up as a Chinese Canadian kid, in having that challenge between the two sides of the coin. Can you dive into that a little for us and explain that?
Oh yeah, sure. I mean, it's funny, like growing up, you're always asked, oh, do you identify yourself as Chinese? Do you identify yourself as Canadian? Like, what do you identify yourself as? Like, my parents immigrated here from Hong Kong back in the early 70s. They were actually high school sweethearts from Hong Kong, and my mom followed my father here. His family immigrated to Canada first, and my aunt ran a corner store. So that's sort of your prototypical early immigrant story, right? So a lot of early immigrants ran corner stores. My grandmother actually worked in the cannery for BC Packers in Steveston. And so, yeah, growing up, it was very, very Chinese for me. Like, we spoke predominantly Cantonese in the home, or actually a sub-dialect. My family ancestry from my dad's side is Toisan. And so growing up, that was the language that I knew because my grandmother took care of me a lot until I started school. And then, as all parents say, is once you start school, you'll lose the Chinese then, and because all your friends speak English, and you want to fit in. You don't want to stand out, right? And so you watch all these different TV shows of the immigrant kid, the Chinese kid with the clothes that look funny, or the food that smelled funny. I identify with all that. I lived all that, like, in the beginning, and then it became like, Mom, I just want like a ham and cheese sandwich, right? You didn't want to stand out. You wanted to fit in. And so you kind of get to a point through elementary school, you don't really pay attention too much when you're that young. It's not really till you get to high school that you kind of realize that it's more of a thing in terms of, who you are and where you're from. But I always saw myself as Canadian, but in high school, that's when the feeling in the middle really kind of stood out, because in the 90s was at the height of this wave of immigrants from Hong Kong, right? Because of the fear of what was going to happen when China took over Hong Kong again from the British rule at the time. So there was there was a massive wave of immigrants from Hong Kong, and my high school was no different. There were like a lot of my classmates were from Hong Kong. So the funny thing was, so the Hong Kong immigrants didn't see me as Chinese. They saw me as what you would call the banana, yellow on the outside, white on the inside. And then eventually, some of my Canadian friends that I grew up with from elementary school started to see me as, oh, you're one of them, you're Chinese. And so you're constantly like, okay, what does that even mean? Like, you're in this sort of constant trying to, high school is about finding yourself. So I didn't know where I fit in. I didn't know, like I grew up and I could play sports really well. I was great at hockey and those type of things. But then, I wanted to fit in with some of my other classmates who were immigrants. So I started watching movies from Hong Kong. I started listening to the music, and, somewhere along the way, I kind of found my own path of being who I am, and I accept and I take in both sides of the culture, and both, like, if you ask me now, oh, what do you identify yourself as? Are you Canadian? Are you Chinese? I'm like, well, I'm both. I'm a Chinese Canadian, and I have both of those backgrounds that have molded me through life, and I try to hold on to, a lot of the Chinese customs and traditions that we grew up with. I don't take all of it verbatim. I mean, like, it's Chinese New Year right now, or what we call Lunar New Year now, if we want to be trying to be more inclusive and being more politically correct. But growing up, you have all these traditions of things that you have to do during the New Year. And growing up as a child, I fought all of these superstitions and traditions, and these old wives' tales. Like, I think my parents must have hated me because I challenged and questioned every little thing, because some of it just made no sense. Coming from a scientific background, I challenged a lot of those things. Like, the idea of, well, I mean, this is not isolated to just Chinese culture, but it's constantly, oh, if you wash your hair and your hair is wet, don't go out, or don't go out when it's cold because you're going to catch a cold. Don't run around after you've eaten because you're going to get appendicitis. Or if you're sick, you can't eat like cold things like ice cream, or you can't eat what is deemed, we talk about yin and yang. So certain foods are either considered really hot or really cold to the body. So some like fried foods or potato chips are really hot. So it's bad if you're sick or you got a sore throat. I didn't believe in any of that. I was just, I'm just going to do whatever I want. And I think it was, pretty difficult for my mom. I was probably a pretty rotten kid, but I challenged all of those things. And, for me, you can say, oh, well, you just pick and choose what works for you. And I'm like, well, yeah, I mean, I have the option of deciding, the best of both worlds and that's sort of the approach that I've taken with my kids. There's some things, old fashioned things that my parents still say to my kids. And if they make sense, I'll let it happen. And if there's stuff that doesn't make sense, I'll put it straight. Or they'll even ask me, or they'll question me like, oh, this doesn't make sense. Why did we do this, or stuff like that, right? Yeah. And so growing up, I always felt like I was in the middle somewhere along the way, and then you kind of just forge your own identity, and I'm proud of it. I mean, we're right now, we're talking a lot about representation and diversity. And it's great to see those things in media and in TV and in music and all of it. But I think that should just a lot of those things I feel that should just happen naturally. But it's true. Not everybody always has equal opportunity for all these things. And so it's nice to see that maybe the tide is turning, and whatever we see in TV and music and politics or whatever is just a cross section of society. It doesn't have to be, oh, you need to be of a certain race or a certain color, or we need more representation of this, and that. It shouldn't be based on what you look like or whatever. It should be based on, your skill set, your qualifications, and it should, really realistically shouldn't have anything to do with your background. That's, but that's the world we live in right now. And that's the continuing conversation we still have to date, right? We're still battling all of those preconceptions and notions that, what I grew up with, we see that now still, we talk about, and we're still seeing that in the world today. And, it doesn't really change, does it? But we should talk about it. I think it's important.
Well, I like to think that it's getting better, and that's something I want to dive back into you with. So when you were growing up, Calvin, you mentioned that your grandmother was working at BC Packing, which is in Steveston. Did you grow up in Richmond?
Yeah, so my grandmother worked she worked at the cannery. So yeah, she did. So I grew up in Richmond, and all of my relatives kind of lived on one street for a while in a couple of different homes. So my grandmother she basically was either in the cannery or she did fresh fish. And I remember as a 15-year-old wanting to get a job, she was going to try to get me a job at the cannery. And I took one step inside to take a look around because she was going to give me a tour. And I turned around with that waft of fish smell hit my face. I said to my grandmother, I'm like, yeah, I don't think I can do this.
So,
My dad was a pretty strict and authoritarian father. And I wish he kind of pulled that on me and said, no, you're going to, your grandma's getting you a job. You're going to work here. I wish he had done that. I wish he would have pushed me to do that because, I backed out of it. I leaned out of it. And honestly, looking back, I wish I hadn't. If that was my child now, I would have made him work. I would have made him go through that. But it didn't. That didn't happen for me.
one of the things I want to point out to the listeners is there's a show on TV, and whether it resonates with some of what you were saying about shows that look back on what growing up in that time frame was, one of the shows that came out probably 6 or 7 years ago was the show Fresh Off the Boat.
Love that show.
The timing of that show, and when you were in high school, it's actually set pretty proximate to when you were growing up.
Absolutely.
So would you say a lot of what those kids go through in that show with their parents, with life, with school, there's some similarities to what you went through in your life growing up?
That's what I love about that show. And I've watched that show with my kids, and my kids love it too, even though they might not get all the 90s references that I get. So, when I watch that show, it resonates and I laugh at it on multiple levels. I get to enjoy it at a level where I think most people can't because, for somebody who watches it, it's a good comedy and people enjoy, it's a family comedy and people can laugh at it. I laugh at it on multiple levels because it resonates with me in terms of a lot of the traditions and the oddities that they go through because of their culture. That was me growing up. A lot of it was. And then on top, then you have all the 90s references with like Shaquille O'Neal and, hip hop R&B and Tupac and Biggie, all of that. That was great. Like that show, it's too bad it's no longer on the air, but was a really, really well written and smart show. Have you seen the whole series? There was one episode they talked about Michael Chang.
No, I haven't seen that one.
So there's one episode where I think the mom loves Michael Chang, wants her kid to become Michael Chang, and Michael Chang was one of the very first, I guess you could say, the very first successful Chinese mainstream athlete of that time. Like we were talking about representation again, there wasn't many, and so when Michael Chang broke onto the scene and was fairly successful in men's tennis at that era, anybody who was Chinese looked up to him. And that was me. Like my grandfather loved tennis. This is my grandfather from my mother's side. And he and I were really close. He lived in Hong Kong, but we visited back and forth. So he would come to Vancouver to visit. And we had through the years visited Hong Kong to see them. And I distinctly remember there's a few things that my grandfather and I really connected on. He was one of the few relatives from Hong Kong willing to speak English with me. And we wrote letters back and forth in English. And I really appreciated that at the time because I always felt like was forced to speak Cantonese. And if I didn't speak Cantonese, then, my grandmother wouldn't want to talk to me and things like that. And so like growing up, you're forced to say, okay, you got to keep the language. You got to, you got to do this. You got to do that with the language. And growing up, you're resistant. You don't want to. I'm like, no, I live in Canada. I speak English. That's my language. And now you kind of appreciate looking back that you're able to hold on to the language still. But like, so growing up with, the other thing I really connected with my grandfather was with tennis. So I remember, the summers that he would come to Vancouver to visit, it would always coincide around the time that it was Wimbledon. And so we would get up early to watch, Wimbledon all day. And he loved Michael Chang, and he talked about, how Michael Chang wasn't necessarily the tallest guy on the court or the strongest guy on the court, but he worked his butt off. He was all about effort. He would chase down balls. Like, that was his style of play, was about effort. That really stuck with me. It was work ethic. Like, you may not be the smartest, you might not be the strongest, you might not be the brightest, but you always got to put in that effort, and that effort will make up for whatever deficiency that you may or may not have, and still, push you towards success. And so that resonated with me, was that work ethic. I tried my hand at tennis for a while. I realized that I wasn't that great at it. I found out later, I realized I was better at badminton. So I kind of flipped over in terms of racket sports, and I played a lot of badminton through my high school years and into my early university years. But Michael Chang's style of play is my style of play in badminton. People think I'm crazy. If you've seen me play badminton, or if you play badminton with me, people think that I'm crazy, because there isn't a shot that I won't try and chase down. And if I have to literally dive to get to that shot, I will. And not many people do that. And so I kind of stand out when I do that. And even now at, 44 years old, I will still do that, much to the chagrin of my body, because my body doesn't like me doing that.
Yeah, I was going to say that as we've both gotten older, because regardless of the sport, I share a very similar style to you, which is simply that I will outwork my opponent. I may not be as skilled as you, but I will play till something breaks. And a lot of opponents aren't willing to do that.
Yeah. Well, and that was the tough part, was like, when I got to a point where, when we kind of got our dad bod, and I was overweight and I was still trying to play the sport, I couldn't do the things that I could do before in my 20s. And I started to get really mad. And that was motivation to get back in shape. That was motivation. I was like, you know what? I let myself get to this point, but I can bring myself back. And so that was another reason that drove me to focus on my fitness over the last 4 or 5 years.
We're definitely going to come back to that. I want to rewind now and go back to, you've grown up, you've finished school, you've decided on dentistry, you're starting to find your stride. Very early on in your career, it only took you 2 years, you started your own practice.
Yeah, I did.
Or purchased a practice, and we'll dive into that, in Abbotsford. So what prompted you at such a young age to go into business for yourself?
When I graduated from dental school, I knew how to fix teeth, and that's about it. And I didn't know much about the side of business in terms of accounting and investments and all of those things. But I did know that it was important to surround myself with people that knew what they were doing. When I graduated from dental school, I surrounded myself with a group of advisors that were familiar with the business of dentistry, so that they could give me guidance on what to expect in terms of, what I'm making for income, what my career path could potentially look like, all of these things. So I'm talking about, I have a really good accountant, and his accounting firm is very familiar with dental practices. I had a really good financial planner who's recently passed on since, but Blake was really, really familiar with dentistry and gave me a lot of great advice through the years. And it was sort of through that kind of made me realize, working as an associate in the beginning of your career is great, because, you're new, you're still learning your skill set, you're still learning what life in a dental practice should look like, because it looks nothing like that in dental school. In dental school, they teach you how to do the procedures, but they don't teach you how to run a practice, or how it should really look like in the real world. So associating is important in the beginning, but you also realize as an associate, you just don't make the same kind of income you would as compared to as if you were an owner. And so this was about 2 years in. So I was associating at the time at a couple of different offices. I was working in East Vancouver with one dentist, and I was also working for actually my original dentist, my own family dentist in Richmond as well. And it was good to work in a couple different offices to kind of give me a bit more of a perspective of different demographics, how dentistry is done differently. Because every practitioner has their own treatment philosophy, has their own way of doing things. And at that point in time, I didn't know what my identity was as a dentist. Like what did I like to do, or what did I want to do in a dental practice? And working as an associate was helpful in kind of, figuring out the things I liked and things I didn't like, and, what were good habits to have and what were bad habits to have. So that was a good experience. A good friend of mine, he went up north and was practicing in the Northwest Territories. And he was up there for about a couple of years. And at that time, he was decided that he was going to move back to the Lower Mainland. And we had always talked about the idea of maybe working together in some form, because we were really good friends. And Roger and I actually had the same financial planners, same advisor, and he was the one that actually connected us to this particular practice that was for sale in Abbotsford. And it just, again, it was kind of serendipitous. The pieces kind of fell together in terms of it was a big enough practice that the two of us could work in there together. It was far enough from the city to know that we were able to stay busy. It's worse now, but I mean, it was already like that even 20 years ago. But the closer you are to the city, the more dental practices there are. The more dental practices there are, the more competition there is, and the more that can affect how busy you are as an associate dentist in particular, but just as a dentist in general. And so the idea of working a little bit further into the suburbs, you're going to have less competition, less dentists fighting for the same slice of pie in terms of patient pool, then you could stay busy. And so that was a number of reasons what attracted us to this particular practice in Abbotsford. And at that time, I was single and unmarried. Roger had just gotten married at the time. And yeah, it just kind of fit. It worked out that we were able to kind of split days. So we each worked kind of 3 to 4 days a week there. And then at the same time, I still maintained working one of my associate positions 1 or 2 days a week. So it kind of rounded out my week, kind of got the best of both worlds. At the time, also gave me a little opportunity, extra time to teach at the dental school as well. So yeah, it was just sort of a good opportunity that kind of presented itself that we kind of jumped in. I have to admit that I felt like I was flying by the seat of my pants when we bought that practice, because I at that point never bought anything. So buying a dental practice is not that different from, say, buying a house, right? You have an evaluation that you review, and then you have advisors that look over the financial statements to make sure that whatever's in the evaluation is representative, and you let your advisors do their thing in terms of assessing whether or not the price that you're willing to pay to purchase the practice is worth what you expect it to be worth. And I learned a lot in those 3 or 4 months it took to make that transaction.
Let's dive into some of that.
Sure.
I want to dive into some specifics with you. The first thing I want to dive into is you made the decision to surround yourself with a number of experts in a variety of fields. Who was it that recommended that to you, Calvin, at such a young age? How did you have the foresight to say, here's 4 or 5 things I don't know much about. I'm going to surround myself with experts?
I had a really good friend in high school I'm still really close with. And I'm not sure where he came up with this. I'm not even sure how he drilled it into my head, but he ingrained in me that relationships is what makes the world go round. Being connected with people is what makes the world go round, and is what allows people to become successful in all aspects of life, in particular in business. So it's about who you know, being connected, knowing people, and these relationships are always a two-way street. You can help them, they can help you one way or another. He was always blunt. He always said friendship is actually not that different as well. You become friends with somebody because there's a give and take. There's a transactional thing that's occurring if you want to look at it in that way. I always thought that he was very rigid in the way he looked at things, but he's not wrong. All relationships are so important.
That's right.
And so it was about getting to know people. And so in dental school, as a class representative in my final year, one of my responsibilities was there were always like different companies and vendors, and whether it be accountants, lawyers, financial advisors, dental products, dental labs, they all wanted to come and get exposure to the dental students because they knew that this was going to be their future business. And so they would come and give lectures. So one of my responsibilities was to get connected with all of these different business people, these different vendors that would come in and arrange for them to come and do lectures. And as a way to make sure we got good attendance from the class, we'd make sure they bring food. So, maybe a pizza night or Greek food or fried chicken or whatever. Feeding a hungry student was always a good way to draw a crowd. So that was sort of where I actually met some of the people that I work with now was from that. And that was the thing, when I'm a firm believer, when it comes to finding people to work with, there's nothing more important than if you're looking at doing something in an area that's not your expertise, it's important to find somebody who does, because that saves you time. You want to go back to cultural. Growing up, you're taught this do-it-yourself mentality, right? It's like, if you can do that, why don't you do that? And so I grew up with this mentality, but I can't do all my bookkeeping. I can't. I don't know enough about bookkeeping. Even if I did, I don't want to do my own bookkeeping, right? I don't want to do my own janitorial service. I don't want to. I could learn, all the ins and outs of the stock market and learn how to do investment online by myself and save, all these investing fees and stuff like that. But it's not my cup of tea. It's not my interest. So I learned very early on is that, do the things that you're good at and find people who are good at doing the things you aren't to do them for you. And there's so many people that are out there that can do it, right?
Yeah. Sorry, I'm going to jump in on that one because it's really important, and a lot of people tend to miss that. And Calvin, you're almost bringing me back to first year university economics classes. When you look at countries and you say, what country is the best at this one thing? What country is the best at that one thing? And if the country that's the best at it, all of that activity should flow to that company or to that person. And what you're effectively saying is, I learned very young to recognize what I was good at and where I should be spending my time. And those things that I wasn't as good at, I should outsource to someone who could do it better, faster, cheaper. And part of that reason, correct me if I'm wrong, is you were putting a value on your own time.
Well, isn't that the entrepreneurial myth? Is that as entrepreneurs, we wear all these hats. We wear the hat of the person actually utilizing and performing the skill. Then you wear the hat of the manager as managing the business, and then you also wear the hat of the entrepreneur and who's in charge of the vision of the business, where you want to take it, where you want to grow it, and so forth. And we wear all of these hats. And in running a business, you want to spend as much time wearing the entrepreneurial hat and less time doing all the other things that you could outsource and allow other people to do, so that you have more time to focus more on the big picture.
To add value.
Absolutely. And so I think it goes back, like when we're talking about relationships, like, when you're looking for a lawyer, you're looking for an accountant, you're looking for an advisor, there's a million of them out there. And there's there's so many good ones. Well, how do you choose? Well, I venture to say that that's no different than in choosing who, your chiropractor is or who your dentist is. Yes, it's important that they're good at what they do, but it's also about whether or not you get along, whether you click, whether you just have that like for each other, that affinity for each other. I think that's super important too, right? And, the guys that I've worked with for years. And so, yeah, when my late financial planner passed away, that was a massive blow for me, because I felt like my entire career, he's had a hand in it in terms of, in the last, 19 years, in terms of from literally when I started to where I am now. He's helped me along the way in terms of on a professional and also on a personal level. He's watched my family grow. And so, yeah, I miss him a lot. And so it was hard to lose him, but at the same time, hard to find someone new that you could trust, that you could work with, knowing that, okay, we're working together, and I'd like to see us work together for a very long time, because there's still a lot of years to go. So yeah, I think that's sort of, looking back, a lot of those relationships I realized were and are still very important.
So let's take a small piece of that and zoom in on it, because I think we'll talk about it from a dentistry perspective, Calvin, but this applies likely to anyone buying a business who wants to be an entrepreneur and wants to do it through acquiring a business. So as you look back at that first practice, and since then you've bought other practices, and we'll get into that. But when you're looking at that first one, and maybe even take some of the information from later ones, young dentist coming out of dentist school, and they're deciding they want to start their own practice. What are 2 to 3 very key things you recommend that they think about in that due diligence of acquiring the business?
We kind of touched on it already. The part of the due diligence was having the right advisors to really have a good look at the financials of the business, making sure that everything looked looked proper, and know that you are going to be able to make a good profit and pay off the loan that you're going to incur to acquire that business. So having a really good accountant who's really familiar with the business and understanding of value of the practices, because not all dental practices are made the same, right? There's some that are, it depends on sort of, where the revenue stream comes from. How was that particular dental practice looked like over the last 5 years? Like, has it been on a steady growth, or has there been a dip? Or has there been a significant growth significant unexplained growth in the last 3 or 4 years? These are things that you need to kind of, see what's going on. Because, if I'm looking at a practice where, let's say, the person only owned it for 5 years, and in the last 5 years, the growth of the practice has been over 100%. So literally, it's doubled its production in the last 5 years. Well, that's a red flag. Like, what's going on? Like, what's happening, and why are they selling? Right? These are the kind of things that you want to look for in it. We're taught to do what we call a chart audit. So we actually go in physically and we look at the patient files, and you can't look at all of them, right? A lot of practices have, well over 1,500 patients in a practice easily.
I'm assuming you do a method of random sampling, and once your sample size is above a certain amount, then it's meant to approximate the population as a whole.
Exactly.
I'm going back to stats class for that one, and maybe my days as an auditor.
Yeah, perfect. So exactly. And I didn't know any of this. I didn't know what I'm supposed to be doing. So again, it was my accountant that taught me of, okay, here's what you're going to do. You're going to pull, 1 out of every 10 charts, and you're going to look at the demographics. Are they married? Are they single? Are they, do they have a family? Do they have dental insurance? What type of dental work have they had done recently? How often do they go and have care? Are they regular? Do they go every 6 months? And you have a look at, have a quick look at the type of dental work that's been done, because you want to make sure that the quality of the dental work stands up, and you also get an idea of the treatment philosophy of the dentist. And so those were things that I learned to do along the way. And that practice that I purchased in Abbotsford wasn't the first practice that we evaluated. There was probably 2 or 3 before we bought the Abbotsford practice that we did that. And then
before you move on, that's really important. Let's pause there, because that was something I did not know. So effectively, those earlier ones that you looked at, you didn't acquire because something came up in the due diligence process, I'm assuming, or in the negotiation process that said, this isn't a fit.
Yeah.
What were some of those things that took you away from making a yes on those earlier ones?
Well, that's kind of what I talked about. So there was this one practice that the current owners had taken over from a longtime dentist, probably about 4 or 5 years prior. And then in that period of time, they grew the revenue by almost 100% in those 5 years, which is unheard of. it's unheard of. It's almost next to impossible to do something like that. And they did it. And they also, the staff turned over completely during that time. And it just didn't look right. Like what it told me was that they were probably really aggressive in their treatment planning and pushed a lot of new dental work onto the existing patients. And so, those were kind of red flags that we kind of saw. And then when we tried to put in an offer, they flat out refused to negotiate on their asking price. Like there was no budge. They didn't want to talk. They were not entertaining anything in terms of, because the asking price that they had, our advisors felt was a little high. So we were trying to negotiate it down a little bit, but they were having none of it. And so we walked away. Interestingly enough, after we bought the Abbotsford practice months and months later, that practice continued to sit on the quote unquote market for a very long time. I'm not even sure that if the owners eventually sold or they just held on to it for a while before they decided to do something else with it. But the market for dental practices is not that different from acquiring real estate. There are brokers that will list the dental practices for sale, and then you go in and you can look at the evaluation, visit the practice itself, and then you put in an offer. The industry is a little bit messed up in the fact that the brokers, the people that list them, are the same people that evaluate them and place the value on the practice, which would never happen in any other industry.
Of course.
But for some reason in dentistry, I don't know why, but that's how it works. So the broker does the evaluation. And so sometimes evaluations could be skewed. They're overpriced. But
I'm going to dive into something just to get the listeners up to speed, because I think I heard something in that one sample that I want to get them out to understand. So a dental practice, much like an accounting practice, you're effectively buying a book of business. And that book of business generates a certain amount of income per year. And you're willing to pay a multiple of that income.
Pretty much.
And one of the things you're doing through that due diligence process is a concept called normalizing the income. So as you go through that charts, as you go through those, you're trying to build up what you view as the client base. And then you're saying, okay, well, if that's my client base, they're saying that their book of business, let's throw out, they're saying the book of business is $2 million a year. But when I look at these charts and I normalize it for what I think I should be charging these clients, it's only $1 million a year. And if I'm paying a 3x multiple, they want 6 million, but I think it's only worth 3 million. So let's negotiate. And that's where they fell down, is they were continuing to try to say, no, our book of business is our book of business, and it is normalized. You think it's less, but we're not willing to entertain that. Does that sound?
Pretty much, yeah. You're basically describing the value of the goodwill of the dental practice, because in a dental practice, there's essentially three things that you're purchasing. You're purchasing the equipment, all the dental equipment that's housed inside the dental practice, and then there's a value to the leaseholds, the furnishings of the office itself. But the biggest value is that goodwill, and evaluating what that value of goodwill is. And over the years, since even the last practice that I bought, that value has jumped significantly. It costs a lot more to purchase goodwill, because let's face it, there's the purchase of dental practices is no different than the way the real estate market has kind of gone. There's a massive shortage, but there's a massive demand for purchase. And that's been caused by a lot of different factors in our industry. There's a lot more dentists that continue to want to move into the Lower Mainland. It's a desirable place to live. There's way too many dentists. But everybody wants to work somewhere and eventually want to become an owner of some sort. So there's competition there, just in terms of sheer numbers. There's also competition with now what we call corporatized dentistry.
Yeah, I want to dive into that with you a little. We can go there now if you'd like, Calvin, because what jumps out to me right away is you say ABC Dental or 123 Dental, and there's these groups that are going around buying up all the practices, centralizing billing, centralizing accounting, centralizing a number of the features and the marketing, the branding. and then simply putting associates in to run those practices, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
What has that done in your mind to the industry? Is it positive? Is it negative? Has it had an impact on you in your practices?
There has been a massive impact, massive impact in the industry. This is sort of what it looks like. That's what sort of dentistry looks like in the United States. Like there's a lot of these sort of corporates that own and run dental practices. I mean, you can kind of compare it to pharmacies, right? You have like the big box stores that have pharmacies, and then you have the small mom and pop pharmacies, right? But in dentistry, it's always been more individual owners. Like practices are run by the individual owner, or maybe an owner might own maybe one or two practices. But somewhere along the way, it started to change in the last, probably in the span of my career in the last 20 years, is that there's more of these corporates that own the dental practices in Canada, in Lower Mainland, but in Canada, and a lot of people don't even know. It's not overt, because each dental practice still has its own name that it runs under, and it's just known to be like if there's an affiliation or they're under a certain umbrella, but it's not overt. So it's not like there's 50 dental practices under one name. It's 50 dental practices with each of their own individual names, but they are actually all interconnected. And exactly what you said is that, they save on costs by centralizing a lot of things, but they also don't care about, I shouldn't say don't care. They're willing to make less margin. They're okay if the practice is not as profitable, because when you group it all together, it's okay. When you're one single practitioner, you look at the bottom line very carefully, right? Because that is your livelihood. You take that home. That's how you take care of your family. So you pay much closer attention to that. And so when you're fighting against something that's bigger, it's harder, right? Let's put it very simple. If you're looking to buy a dental practice, well, now you're fighting somebody with deeper pockets who's willing to overpay, who's willing to maybe outbid you for a dental practice when something comes to market. But sometimes they don't even get to market because a lot of these brokers are already connected to these corporates and say, okay, well, I've got some decent practices that are being listed, but they might not even list it. It might just go directly to the corporates already, right?
Like in real estate, they call that a pocket listing, where effectively it never even comes to market. It's off market.
Well, in dentistry, there's no regulations behind any of that, right? And so a lot of the practices that even show up on the listing, by the time they show up, the ones that show up on the listing probably aren't as good. Maybe they don't make as much money. They have more warts to them, right? Interestingly enough, the two practices that I've owned, so they were both practices that were not listed. I knew I didn't want to fight what was listed. It was all through connections and relationships that I came upon the particular individuals that were selling their practices.
Let's jump to your second practice in 2012.
Yeah.
You left Abbotsford and you went to where you are now, North Delta Dental. What prompted that move, Calvin?
Well, by about 2009, 2010. Well, by 2010, I was married with two kids, and the commute to Abbotsford was starting to feel really long. It was about 1 hour and 10 each way from where I currently live to go to work. And at the time, in the beginning, when I first started, it was fine. It didn't bother me. I didn't have really real issues with it. But then with a young family, by the time I got home, the young kids were already often asleep. I just started to feel more of a burden on me in terms of that commute, and started to realize that that maybe it was time for me to work closer to home. I think in the beginning there was an idea to maybe move further east and move closer to the dental practice. But when our kids were born, both sides of the family, in terms of our parents, helped with the kids. And so when we kind of saw how that dynamic was playing out and realizing that they were going to be a really big part of our lives and the kids' lives, I knew I had to relocate, my career and work closer to home. And so that's what prompted me to decide to leave Abbotsford. And so in early 2011, both My partner and I at the time, we sold the practice together because, he was in a similar boat. He had a young family as well, and was kind of in a similar scenario. And so we were fortunate enough. Again, we didn't quote unquote list the practice per se. We kind of worked through connections, and I found an individual that I knew that we were comfortable enough with in terms of selling our practice to, because we weren't motivated just by getting, top dollar for the value of the practice. We were also interested in bringing on an individual that we knew was going to take care of the patients and to take care of our staff that we had relationships with. We wanted to make sure that it was going to be left in good hands. That was also motivated for us. So yeah, it worked out. It worked out for everyone at the time, because David still owns and runs that practice now in Abbotsford, and he's super successful. And I think almost all the staff that I had that were there at the time still work for him. So it shows what a great guy and what a great boss he is too. So I'm happy for them. I miss them. Yeah, I miss my staff. I miss my patients out there too. But that was sort of more of a personal sort of family scenario that sort of prompted that decision. So when I sold that practice, I did some locuming. So I worked as a fill-in dentist for dentists who decided wanted to go on long-term vacations, or maybe if there was a dentist there was one dentist office I worked in, the dentist was in a car accident. And then there was another practice where the dentist was on mat leave. And so during that probably year and a half or so that I was locuming, I probably worked in about, I don't know, maybe 10 or 12 different offices. I wasn't, I'm not to toot my own horn or anything. I was in pretty high demand just because of the fact that I was a more experienced dentist. So at that time, 2011, I was, 9 years out.
9 years out, you'd run your own practice. You had a lot of experience that people would be looking for.
Yeah. And so, and that, if I was looking for a fill-in dentist, that's, that would be what I would want, because I would trust that they know what they're doing in terms of the dentistry side, but also the managing of the practice side. So yeah, it was a really good experience. Again, same kind of thing as looking back to when I was associating. I worked in all these different offices, saw how they did different things in terms of how they ran the practice, saw the different types of materials that they used. When you're working in your own little world in your own dental practice, you're set in your own ways for a period of time. You grow comfortable with certain things that you do because it works. And coming out of it was great, because it was uncomfortable, because you're working month to month, or you're always making sure you're trying to line up the next gig and fill up your schedule to make sure you stay busy and you're still creating an income in the meantime. But it was really great because I made a lot of connections, met a lot of people, and made a lot of relationships, made new relationships, whether it be dentists or dental hygienists or dental assistants. That, like I said, it goes back to those connections. It's great because, when I ran my own practice, and let's say I needed a temp, because I had an employee that was sick or an employee that was on vacation or something, I could reach out to some of these people that I had met in the past to see, hey, if you don't work this day, are you interested in coming to help me out? That sort of thing. So,
and how long did you do that for, Calvin?
The locuming was about a year to year and a half. And then that's when I came upon the North Delta practice. It was a colleague of mine, Dr. Hunter. She graduated a year after me from dental school. And so at the time, she was pregnant with twins and had a 2-year-old daughter. And so she had already done a mat leave the previous with her first child, and was at that time kind of wasn't sure if she wanted to do a mat leave again and have a locum, or maybe decided she wanted to spend some more time with her family and take a break from dentistry for a few years. So that was sort of what she decided to do, and that's why she was selling her practice at the time. And same kind of thing. It was kind of serendipitous that the things kind of fell together, and it worked out for her and worked out for me. Yeah, and so I've been at North Delta Dental now for, what was it, 2012. So a little over almost 8.5 years now I've been there. So I'm really happy. It's much closer to home. I commute about 25 minutes each way, which is easy for me. The patients are really great, and over that 8 years, I really have tried to make that practice my own, and it has sort of a lot of my identity in it. There's a really great sort of friendly and family feel to it. I have a lot of young families in the practice, but I always say that practice, I see everybody literally from 1 to 100 plus. So it's something that I'm still continue to try to make better. We always are evaluating and reevaluating ourselves in terms of how to make the patient experience better. That's always been my focus. We talked about relationships earlier, and we talked about how there's hundreds of dentists and hundreds of lawyers and accountants, and how do you choose? Well, to be honest, the average patient wouldn't know whether my dentistry is superior to the guy next door or whatever. If you were going to a healthcare provider, you don't, how do you evaluate their skill set? Unless you were in the industry yourself, right?
Yeah, it's the experience you have when you're there.
Yeah, absolutely. So we look at it from literally, before you even walk in the door in terms of how we communicate, how convenient it is for you to schedule an appointment, how convenient is it for you to get a reminder for the appointment, and then, from the moment that you walk in, what that experience is. And we're professional, but we also are very, very cognizant that that can be a sterile or uncomfortable environment for a lot of people who've had maybe bad experiences when they're younger. So I strive to make sure that it feels friendly and comfortable, that you come in and you're hanging out with friends. That's kind of the feel that I want for people when they come to the dentist. Yeah, you're gonna have sometimes you get some dental work done and it's not the most comfortable thing, but it's kind of the nature of it. But it's about those relationships and those conversations that I have. And for me, one of the coolest things that I've always really enjoyed through the years is literally watching families grow. I mean, especially now that I'm a dad, I appreciate it even further. But like, we take pictures of patients for their patient files, and there's a lot of kids. I've been there for 8 years, and I've literally watched them grow before my eyes, right? And a lot of them have become teenagers, and they all tower over me and stuff. And it's really cool to see. I mean, I have this really great story where I had a patient that was in Abbotsford, patients of mine in Abbotsford, and at the time it was husband and wife and just their young son. He was a baby at the time, and then they had relocated to North Delta, so they came and found me. And that son, by the time we saw him, he was probably 5 or 6 years old. And I always would joke with him, like, I've known you since you were a baby. And they love going to the dentist, and hopefully it was because at a very early age we instilled a good experience for them. But yeah, I love watching families grow, and that's sort of the joy that I get when I see my patients. It's obviously the satisfaction of providing really good care, and knowing that I've given them the best advice and best care that I can. But at the same time, it's there'll be patients that will come in and talk hockey with me. We'll talk about the Canucks or not the Canucks, because I have patients that are Flames fans. But we'll have really great conversations about hockey, or I have really great conversations about food. A lot of patients know that I love to cook and I love to eat out. I have this one particular patient that literally, if my hygienist didn't stop us, we could probably talk the whole appointment about new restaurants. Those are the things that I value. Those are the relationships I value. Like, I love the fact that they're part of my lives, and hopefully they love the fact that I'm part of their lives in that manner as well. Not just there to fix teeth and make sure that they smile great.
No, and I'm going to switch directions with you, because you mentioned not just fixed teeth, and you are a man of many talents. I was going to go down the foodie path, because I know how much you enjoy, whether it's cooking, eating great meals, but I'm cognizant of time, and there's a couple other areas I want to dive deep with you. You talked about loving seeing people grow, and 4 to 5 years ago, you made another shift. You got your certification as a coactive coach and started coaching. Can you tell us what drove you to make that decision to be a coach when you're already running a business?
Yeah.
And you have a young family?
Well, I think about 4 to 5 years ago, I was going through a lot of difficulties on a more personal level, difficulties with my marriage, difficulties in just happiness in my career. I was bothered by a lot of things. I was irritated by a lot of things. I, just felt a lot of unhappiness or dissatisfaction of where I was at that time, despite all of the successes and the things that I had in life. And I should have been, people would say, oh, you should have been really happy with what you had and whatnot. But, it was a period of time where it was just from a mindset, just a personal way I felt about things. It just wasn't working for me. And so I spent some time working with different people to try to figure out how to be better, because I wasn't satisfied with where I was at. And was from there with one of the individuals I was working with, who was a coach at the time as well. She kind of made me realize that there was this passion inside of me that's always been there. It just shows up in sort of different forms in terms of, wanting to help people, wanting to teach, wanting to provide information. As a dentist, I'm not just there to fix teeth. I'm there to, educate in each individual's health and in terms of oral health or just overall health in general, and how they're all interrelated. I'm there as a resource. You take what I have to say, if you want to hear it, great. And if you don't, that's okay too. But I've always, prided myself as a go-to person in terms of being a good resource. And I stay up to date with all the most scientific research and making sure that the information I'm providing is up to date and accurate as possible. But that was from there that I realized that's always been in my background. I love to teach. I love to help. When I graduated from dental school, I went back to actually help teach a course, and I was mentoring a lot of younger dental students who had an affinity to me because I was a newer grad. I could speak to them more on their level, or they felt that maybe I understood, their stresses and what they were going through. And I was always more than happy to help and give them, share my experience. And if my experience helped them in any way, that would be great. I used to coach and teach badminton. When I graduated from high school, my old high school coach, he brought me back in as assistant coach. And then I got my experience in terms of coaching from there. I loved being able to help a lot of these team players get the success that they achieved, and took pride in that. And so, knowing all of these things, I looked into life coaching. I knew a few individuals who had done training. And so it was a friend of mine who had done training with Coactive, CTI, the Coaches Training Institute. And so I kind of did some research about their training and the courses that they offered. And yeah, I signed up and I dove headfirst into the training. I didn't actually get my certification. I was actually in the process of getting ready to do my certification, which is kind of like your practicum. The process of certification is you get X number of clients and you coach X number of hours, and at the same time you're doing more coursework coinciding at the same time. I never got into it because I actually ended up back. I had some sort of things that required more of my attention in dental practice at the time. So I actually ended up having to back burner the certification process. So I didn't really get into it for too long. During my training, I did some coaching of some friends and colleagues, and that's about it. That's sort of, but I think the most that I got out of that training, when you're training to become a coach, you get coached yourself. And I think that was probably the greatest value that I got during that time, was when I was being coached and trying to figure out my own stuff, trying to figure out what motivated me, what made me happy, what made me realize that I still had a lot of learning and growth to do as an individual, to become better person general, whether it be become a better father, spouse, brother, son, boss, dentist, whether it be in terms of communication, in terms of understanding others, all of those things. That kind of spurred on this whole journey of, I don't know, learning,
Self-discovery.
Self-enlightenment.
Yeah, until we've done our own work, it's hard to help others.
Absolutely.
What I heard from you in that answer was that you started the process by doing some work on yourself, and then that reignited a passion you've had throughout your life of coaching, of giving back, of teaching. And you even talked about it, watching families grow, watching people grow. And one of the things I had noted, for those who don't know, we know each other fairly well. Our children go to school together. We talk a lot over the years. And I had seen that you'd put it on the back burner. What I had noticed though, Calvin, was through COVID, you started getting a little bit back into it. You started posting some more messages around coaching. You started sharing some thoughts in your coaching profiles again. Am I wrong in saying that you're starting to bring that back a little?
I think that a lot of that came from, with COVID, I had a lot more time to work on myself even more. So I've spent a lot of time reading more. I've read a number of different books over the last year in terms of building good habits, the idea of resilience, idea of being comfortable with the uncomfortable. I've been doing a lot of reading, a lot of learning, and it kind of got me to the point of wanting to share this knowledge. And that's probably why you start to see me sort of post a little bit more about different things that I've been coming across, because it's great stuff. It's stuff that I would never have looked at 10 years ago, 15 years ago.
That's right.
I don't know if it's because of age or if it's because of life circumstances that has pushed me in this path, but realizing that me, I should say, I won't say we, but me personally, like there's a lot of tools and skill sets that I still have to learn, that as I'm learning, I want to share, not just with necessarily the people around me, but most importantly with my children, and giving them the best opportunity to succeed in life. You know, I joke, but it's kind of true that if we actually it was available to us when we were younger, whether it be teenagers or early 20s, for us to work with therapists to help with in terms of learning how we think and how we deal with our emotions and how we understand people's viewpoints and motivations, like the world would be a better place. We just simply didn't have that kind of skill set. We didn't get that from our parents, right?
Yeah.
And that's not their fault. That's, you know, they did the best and raised us the best they knew how. But I realized that for me, that I can be better. I don't have to parent the same way. I want to provide my children with the best opportunities that they can on a academic, but also on emotional level that simply I didn't get growing up, and that's not anybody's fault. That's just the way it was. But the fact that I know better, that I know I can do better, has really changed my approach to how I parent my children, and how when they worry about academics, I keep telling them that that's not the most important thing. I keep trying to stress the importance of relationships and communication and understanding what the other person's feeling and thinking. Like those things are just as important as to whatever their feelings, and then giving them the opportunity to work their stuff out. I'm never gonna. They'll know that I'm always there to help them, but they know that I'm not going to fly in and save them every single time either. They need to work through their own issues, or work through their own difficulties and challenges that they face. And that, I think that's one of the things that I've learned in more recent years, is that by giving them the opportunity to do those things, they build this self-confidence and this awareness of what they're capable of doing. I mean, if anything, children are actually more resilient than we give them credit for. They're more resilient than us as adults.
That's right. By allowing them to succeed, by allowing them to fail and learn from their failure, you're actually teaching them how to be resilient.
Absolutely.
If we as parents always jump in with the answer, our children will always expect someone to give them the answer. Periodically, exactly. we have to let them fail. I'm going to take us in a direction here, because we're getting to somewhere where I definitely wanted to have some meat in our conversation. And I just wanted to, while we're there, before we get there, share a situation that I had the other night with my youngest son that was pretty emotional for me and may resonate with you, because it hit a lot of the things you talked about. My youngest son has a lot of energy, and he may not have the greatest attention. And we've never necessarily had him diagnosed, but if he was at a psychiatrist and they told me he had ADHD or ADD, I probably wouldn't be super surprised. And he had a situation that occurred at school, and he got in trouble for it. And we were talking to him about it the other night. And he just kept saying to me, "Daddy, you don't understand. Daddy, you don't understand." And through a lot of the work I've been doing, which is similar to what you've been doing, it was an opportunity to be vulnerable with him and say, "Well, son, I do understand. You know, when I was growing up, I had the same challenges that I see in you. So what I see in you is things that I saw in myself." I didn't have it labeled. I did have it labeled as an adult, actually, but not as a child. And what I'd realized is I've been through what you've been through, son. I understand what's going through your head because my whole life, that's what went through my head. And what I've learned is here's 5 or 10 things that I can do to overcome those challenges because I've been where you are. And you and I, about a month ago now, it might have been 2 months, Calvin. It seems like yesterday, we were chatting on WhatsApp and you suggested to me the idea of putting together a retreat or a session, if you will, with students. Our oldest boys are both in grade 7. Very formative year. They're about to go into high school. They're going through puberty. They're going through a lot of life changes. It's beautiful to watch, but it's also worrying because it's a very important point in their life. And you suggested, wouldn't these kids really benefit from a lot of what we've learned in life? And a lot, whether that's, we made some notes to each other, whether that's principles on how to achieve life success, tools to help them communicate more effectively, tools to help them learn and read more effectively, and then having a Q&A of questions or concerns they may have. That's something I'd really love to spend the next 20 minutes with you just diving into. What made you think of that? And if you recall, at the time you messaged me, I was reading a book and I'd wrote a note in it that I wanted to help as many people as possible grow in certain areas. So I was thinking the same thing as you, not necessarily with kids that were the age of our sons, with adults. But then a comment I made was, well, if we can help young people with this, we can also help people that are older and may not have had that same learning when they were young. So do you want to dive into that together and talk about how you came up with that idea, why at that time, and then just some ideas we have for what that could look like?
Yeah. When we first talked about it, I think it was a talk that I attended, and it was talking about young people, it was talking about teenagers, and it was talking about the challenges and the difficulties that our teens go through now. Whether it be, pressures from school, pressure from their peers, pressure on social media, that what they deal with now is probably, 10 times, 50 times, 100 times more challenging than what we dealt with, just because of their constant connectivity of being online, right?
Yeah, and the social media magnifies everything.
Absolutely. I've been spending a lot of time on trying to figure out and navigate what my house rules are when it comes to, allowing my kids to have access to the internet, have access to video gaming, social media, all of those things. I know it's not something that I can just say, oh, you're not allowed to do it, or okay, here, do whatever you want. It's been a challenge in terms of trying to figure out what's appropriate, what's not appropriate, when to sort of let go on certain things, how to still monitor or have an open enough communication with your kids to know what's going on in their lives. Because, let's face it, as they get to the teenage years, they're not there's going to be a pulling away, right? There's going to be my friends are important than my parents. And I've really tried really hard to always maintain a really good open communication with my kids. Like I check in with them regularly. Sometimes they give me something, sometimes they don't, but also like knowing how to read them, knowing when something's up or whatever. And, I think it was a statistic about suicide rates and how suicide rates in teens, in the teen demographic, like jumped exponentially, coinciding with the introduction of social media and the internet and that impact. And I think back at other times when we were a teenager and going through high school, and that was a big transition. I remember going from grade 7 to 8 being just a massive transition. For me, is because the school that I went to, most of my classmates from elementary school didn't go to that school, so I literally started from scratch in terms of making new friends and remembering the challenges of it. And so when I think of that, I think about that, and I think about the hormonal changes. We both have sons, right? So you think about, what they're going through on a puberty level, and, girls and all of these things. And I kind of talk back about what I said earlier, like, well, wouldn't it have been great if we had somebody that knew how to teach and coach us on understanding our emotions and how to, one, understand them, how to manage them, how to speak about them, how to be comfortable with what you're feeling, how to be how to be comfortable in talking to other people, how to talk to girls, or how to talk to other guys, or how to talk to your teachers without having some kind of fear or whatever, but still have respect. How to I'm just thinking about the things that I didn't have. I didn't. Nobody. There's no class for it.
Yeah, that's right.
And it's not like your parents could teach you those things. Well, at that time, that just wasn't a thing. And but I also look at, well, how many parents can or able or want to do these things now? Or if there was a class available to it, how many parents would enroll their children in that? It was sort of where I kind of where I was kind of playing around with this idea. Now, I'm not saying that I'm any sort of expert of any kind when it comes to this kind of stuff. I'm just saying that, I've started to learn a lot about, and I want to share it. And I see that this is the age that is the perfect time to start to talk about these things. Because, if we think back when you were a teenager, if we talked about our feelings, we would get ridiculed.
Yeah, absolutely.
We would get we would get admonished. You would get destroyed. You were going to be like the weak kid. You're the whiny kid, or you're the whatever, right? You're supposed to be, you're supposed to be tough. You're supposed to be cool, and you're not supposed to get too many good grades because otherwise you're going to be the nerd or the geek or all this crap that you have to go through in high school. So if I'm able to give a little bit more to equip these kids going through this transition period to deal with it a little bit better, how much better is it going to be for them and for everybody else that they connect with? And each relationship that they have, that how much better could that be? That's the impact that I was looking that I could do, that I could give, not just to my kids, but to other kids.
Yeah, because I don't know how many parents, Calvin, talk to their children about these topics, which I know both of us talk to our children about. And I may actually even think that when our kids are in grade 7, and it's very important as well, when you mentioned you going to a high school that was different. Our 4 boys go to a school that is only K-7. So they're automatically going to a school that will be with new children in high school next year. And I think we're both going through that process of determining what that school is, what it looks like. But it may already be a bit too late. I think we're actually better served to start having those conversations with the kids that are in grade 4, that are in grade 5, so that by the time they get to grade 7 and they're making that transition to high school, they've already somewhat set up that groundwork. I'm quite surprised by the amount of things that Caden, my oldest boy, is aware of that I didn't realize he had picked up through these conversations, right? You know my oldest son, he's not the most communicative kid. He doesn't, not too many words come out of that mouth. We actually were able to watch his interview for one of the schools he's applying to. We had our Nest camera set up. He was in that room, so we played it back later. And so it was the first time where a person would ask him something and I would see him give an answer about goal setting. And if you want to achieve X, then you have to have goals. You have to have a plan, because if you don't have a plan, you can't get there. Almost if you're not planning, then you're planning to fail. And I was blown away that he actually, that I drill that one in fairly regularly, but I didn't know it made its way in, Calvin.
You had a proud father moment. It was a mini Clint right there.
Yeah, I was like, oh my gosh, I've rubbed off on this kid. Whether it's good or bad, I don't know. We'll see.
Of course you have. Both. It's both.
You never know. And so I think I've been having those conversations with him about goal setting probably since he was in grade 5. And, so now when I put Trip to bed, he's having nightmares, and it's a rough spot for him. And part of it is, I said to him, hey, I had the exact same thing when I was your age. Part of having that extra energy is our brains, they're just always firing and they overthink. And so all of a sudden, they're thinking about zombies and things they shouldn't. And so I totally get it, son. I'll lay with you till you fall asleep. He's started to get me to read my writing to him. And I blog about things like cognitive behavioral therapy, stoicism, and he's wanting to learn about that. And so I'm teaching him that.
Have you guys done meditation together?
We had a period of time where I would lay in bed with him and I would meditate with him at night, because I keep telling him, for the challenges he faces, meditation is going to be one of the most important things as a tool for him in his life. And I start next weekend, I start a 2-year course to be a mindful meditation teacher.
Nice.
And one of the reasons I'm doing that, and you're probably not surprised, you and I tend to do these same things, is to be able to have that as a tool to teach.
Yeah.
The two of them, and to teach my sister's kids and my brother's kids, because I think they can all benefit from that in their life. And I have some experience, but not enough where I want to say, well, here's how you do it. So I want to be able to sit down with them and say, hey, I've taken a 2-year course on this. I'm reasonably knowledgeable about it. Let me help you understand it, answer your questions. And if you want to have a circle, whether it's, we meet once a month or we jump on a Zoom, we can meditate together and sit together. So that's something I'm definitely looking forward to. And once I start the course, I want to use it as a means to leverage it with the family, and at least once a week have a family sit together.
Yeah. No, that's great.
And just have a little bit of an educational component there.
Well, the interesting thing that I guess I always was aware, but I wasn't aware to what extent. But at the school, the kids do get, as part of at school, they do learn some of these things too. They are, I don't know what it's called, but they have one of their teachers there does teach about mindfulness and emotions and those types of things to a certain degree. I don't know to how deep it goes into, but I like when I start talking about some of these things to them, they're already familiar with the terms that I'm using, which is great, because then it's easier to be able to go a little bit deeper with some things with them, whether it be mindfulness or whatnot.
Is that Miss Nosette?
That's correct, Miss Nose. Yeah.
Miss Nosette.
And I can see that how some kids really take in what she has to say, and some kids tune out what she has to say as well. So
yeah, one of my boys works with her for an extra hour, I think an extra hour a week, and she really helps him with emotional regulation.
Yes, absolutely.
Even the other day, he had a bit of a challenging interaction with me and his mom.
Yeah.
We were laying in bed later, and he was beating himself up about it. And he was saying, I have to learn not to do that. And I'm working with Miss Nose, and, I should know not to do it. And I had to just really let him know to be compassionate with himself. Even as his father, I make those mistakes. His mother makes them. We all were human. We're going to fail, and we can't beat ourselves up about it, Calvin. It was really, really hard to watch, but he really resonates with what she teaches him.
Well, I mean, how our kids deal with certain things is a lot of what they've seen us model to them, right? The good and the bad. You talked about the good and the bad.
That's right.
The good and the bad is important. It's not just about being good. It's about being bad, because that's where we learn. That's where they learn. As you know, I'm recently divorced. In the beginning, when my ex and I were, we had worked on our marriage for a number of years and came to the conclusion that we were better off apart rather than together. And so we're still on very good terms, and we still are very much on the same page when it comes to parenting the kids. But I think in the beginning, one of my resistance to separation and divorce was my worry of the impact it would have on the children, and how bad it could be, right? And going back, and I think a lot of that dates back to what I alluded to earlier in terms of my own personal journey of trying to be better and find my own happiness in things in life and whatnot. But I think one of the realizations I came to was that the divorce is just going to be part of my kids' stories. It's part of their learning in their life path, that my divorce doesn't have to be a negative thing. Obviously it's sad. Obviously, the kids want to be in what we see as a traditional family makeup of mom, dad, kids. But how I constantly reframe it for them is like, well, our family's just different now. You still have mom and dad that love you dearly, but it's just going to be a little bit different than what it is. And it's tough to watch at different moments. Like my youngest, there was one occasion, probably about 4 or 5 months ago, It was one particular day after school. I took the kids out, went out for a walk to see, and then we were going to grab dinner. And then during the walk, I usually will, these are sort of the moments I kind of give them an opportunity to talk about, what they're going through, what they're feeling. I always try to check in, see how they're doing. And, I didn't hear anything from anyone, either of them. And it wasn't until that evening or even I think the next day that my youngest was really beating himself up. He was really upset, and I went to sit down with him and had a long talk with him. And he goes, I don't understand. I don't have a family anymore. I see other families walking by and other moms and dads with their kids, and that's not my family anymore. It's gone. It's broken. And that was my opportunity to really have an open conversation about those emotions and how he's feeling and what he's going through. And we talked about how it's perfectly fine to feel what he's feeling. It's okay for him to feel sad, and how important it was for him to tell me that he was feeling sad. But I was also trying to reframe things and making him realize, doesn't have to be a bad thing. I talked about how, you saw how mom and dad used to fight all the time. Now that we're not together, you don't see us fight, right? We get along. You see that mom's happier or dad's happier, and we focus on the things that, although are different, that could be better. And these are the things that I realize that, this is what is part of their own journey, what they're going to learn about relationships, good and bad, right? If I stayed in a marriage where I was always arguing and not getting along with my spouse, what does that model to my kids? That's okay, that's the way their relationship should be? Or would they be better off seeing how both their parents realized that they were, in a place that they weren't happy, and worked towards trying to find out what made them happy, right? I mean, I'm going through my own journey in terms of that, and so is my ex, and hopefully my kids can be a witness to that, of realizing, okay, things weren't great, but this is what they did to make things better. And, hopefully that's my opportunity to share that experience and allow them to learn and be better for themselves too, right?
How does that seem to resonate with him? When you had that conversation, how did he come out the other side of that conversation?
Surprisingly, is my youngest that has been dealing with it harder than my oldest. I don't know if it's an age thing, because my eldest, if anything, probably had more issues with anxiety and stuff when he was younger. And so both kids have worked with the psychologist in the past for different things, just things that I wasn't at the time maybe necessarily equipped to help them with. And so, talking about surrounding yourself with good advisors and people that knew what they were doing, we found a really good child psychologist that was working with both our kids at the time, and that allowed them to work through their emotions, and at the same time gave me better insight of what they were going through and what they were feeling, so that I knew how to better support them. And so they're coming around, right? I mean, there's still moments that they're going to feel sad about stuff, but there are also moments they recognize that both mom and dad are probably in a better place than they were, from a few years ago. And so that's part of my other motivation of working on myself, is because I want to be a better model for them, right? I want to, show them that I'm how I can be happier, or how I can be healthier, or eat better, or work out more, and all of these things. These are healthy habits that I want to model for my kids, right? That's been one of my big motivating factors as well, is just being a better role model for them.
And how has that process over the last couple of years been for you? So it was challenging for the boys. How's it been for you coming out the other side of it, Calvin, which was just recently?
Yeah, sure. I'm not going to lie that it wasn't easy. It definitely had its own challenges for a very long time, especially when you've been together with someone for so long. I finally got to a point where I've made my peace with everything that's happened. But I think the important thing was to recognize that I had to allow myself to go through a grieving process. The loss of a relationship is really not that different than grieving a death.
The relationship has died. There has been a death that you have to overcome.
Yeah. And so you have to allow yourself to mourn and go through those steps of grieving, right? And eventually, if you go through that grieving process, you get to a place of acceptance, and you get to a place of forgiveness, and just wanting the best for everybody, and moving forward in a positive way rather than dwelling on the things that weren't good, that weren't positive. There's no sense for any of that, because in the end, you want what's best for everyone involved. So I think that's sort of where I'm at with things, in terms of just being ready to just look forward, rather than looking back.
Which is a very, very healthy way to look at it, Calvin. Effectively, at the end of the day, this is still the mother of your children, and there's nothing better for them than to have happy dad, happy mom, who are able to still, even if not together, have a communication channel so that they see that mom and dad, although apart, are still aligned in their thinking and wanting the best for each other.
Absolutely. And I think they also know that, that whatever they've been told by one parent is going to be repeated by the other parent in general, when it comes to, rules and expectations of things, that they're not going to be able to necessarily get away with something with one parent versus another, or whatever. And we constantly have those conversations. We're constantly trying to do our best to support the kids, especially when we recognize that something's not right, whether it be physically or emotionally or whatever they might be dealing with. We definitely, if anything, maybe communicate better now than we did before.
That's beautiful, Calvin. So Calvin, as we're getting close to winding up, I want to be cognizant of your time, and I think we're gonna have another interview down the road where we dive into a lot of the topics that we didn't go as deep today as I know we both want to, and maybe we talked about once COVID's over, we'll get together, share some wine, and go deep on some of these topics. Where can our listeners find you?
If you want to follow me about when it comes to learning about dentistry and dental health, my own practice website is northdeltadental.ca. You can find me on Facebook, on Instagram, and on YouTube, basically of a similar name, either some North Delta Dental or North Delta Dentist. I've done a lot of blogs and vlogs, and my kids have helped me with different videos through the years.
The Ramen Kids.
The Ramen Kids, and then they also took on a persona of Smiling Sam and the cavity-free kid.
Yeah, the cavity-free kid. I believe I have watched almost all of these videos over time, Calvin, as they've come online.
Yeah, I mean, it all started with when they were young. I mean, they were really young, and they had already said, "Dad, can I have a YouTube channel? I want to do a YouTube channel about playing Minecraft, or unboxing a new Lego that I had." I'm like, "No, I don't think that's a great idea. But if you want, you can help me with my YouTube channel." So that's sort of how they ended up getting involved. And now they're all grown up, and we haven't done as many, but I'm sure they could probably do a few more. But it's amazing that I don't know where it came from. It's not something I taught them, but they are super comfortable in front of a camera. They are super comfortable when it comes to like talking about stuff or explaining stuff, and it's amazing. I look at them, I'm like, I definitely didn't have that skill set when I was their age. I definitely didn't even have that skill set when I was in high school, and I'm just amazed at the stuff that they can do. It's pretty impressive. I remember recently catching a video they had recorded of themselves playing a video game, and they were like explaining the game that they were playing. And this was recorded probably at least 4 or 5 years ago. So my eldest must have been like, I don't know, 7 or 8 years old. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm listening to this recording, and I'm like, there's no way I could have done this even in high school. I was amazed at what they could do. So yeah, that's dentistry. And then we touched a little bit. We didn't get too much into it, but as you had mentioned, I'm a big foodie. I do a lot of cooking. I do a lot of eating. I love finding new places to eat, hole in the wall, whether it be, smashed cheeseburgers like I had today from a food truck, or fine dining, whatever it is. You can find me on Instagram at the Vancouver Foodie Dentist. It's a place where I share photos and sometimes recipes, or just my opinions about restaurants that I've eaten at and stuff like that. I'm a firm believer about when it comes to restaurant reviews, I don't give actual reviews. Like, I won't tell you if it's good or bad. I'll tell you what I liked and what you should try, because I don't believe in restaurant reviews in that manner. because I'm not an expert. And I don't even really know how you can classify yourself as an expert other than if you were in the industry and you were a chef yourself, how you could consider yourself to be a food critic of some form, unless you know how to cook it. And I think that's what drove me to wanting to learn how to cook more, was because I was fascinated with eating at all these different restaurants and wanted to know how they made it. But I'm a firm believer. I don't like giving reviews because, if I had a bad experience, then I might not go back to the place. But I'm not going to go online and dump on them and say, oh well.
Yeah, and ruin someone's livelihood.
Exactly. I think that's the one thing I think a lot of these self-professed foodies and food critics that are online, they're giving their ratings or their opinions about what they liked or didn't like or at the restaurant, has a massive negative impact on a person's livelihood. Like, these are small businesses. These are individuals that are literally trying to make an honest living, running their business, trying to take care of their family, and taking care of their employees so their employees can take care of their families. They're not there to rip you off. They're not there to scam you. They're there to try to make an honest living off of, the skill set that they have, which is cooking and trying to provide good food and a good experience for people, right? And so it kind of, I'm on my soapbox a little bit here, but it kind of drives me nuts when I see people, giving a bad review for a place that they ate at. I'm like, your palate and my palate is different. What I like and you like could be two different things, right? And so for me, when I look at restaurant reviews, I'm not necessarily looking at what was good or bad. I'm just curious what people tried, look at photos or the names of different dishes that people have eaten that were popular, so that I know what to order, and I'm going to go try and make my own opinion of whether I like it or not. And if I don't like it, I'm not going to go and blast them. There's no sense in that. I'm just choose to take my dollars and my business somewhere else, right? And that's the way I think people should do it, rather than going online and like saying bad stuff about people. Could have been an off day. Something we're all human. Stuff happens, right? So whether a dish came out cold or maybe it was under seasoned doesn't matter to me. You know what I mean? Like, those things aren't important. People are allowed to make mistakes.
I saw you write a post on this one recently, so I knew I definitely knew how you felt. So I'm glad you were able to get that out. Are there any parting thoughts you want to leave the listeners with?
Hey, thanks for having me. This was a fun chat. I hope maybe some people got a chance to learn some stuff from us in our conversation here. And yeah, I'm always open to having these interesting and deeper conversations with people. It's not always easy. I can definitely say that you're probably just one of a few handful of friends that we kind of have these kind of conversations with. Not everybody's necessarily comfortable talking about this kind of stuff, right? Some people are more interested in just talking about sports or food or whatever, and that's cool too. No worries. But yeah, this was fun, and yeah, thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining me, Calvin. And next time we talk, we're going to dive deep into food because Calvin was underselling himself. He's an amazing cook. I'd even start to put him into a category of chef.
Oh, I wouldn't use that word.
And for those who don't, he's getting close. And this man also travels the world and eats at some very great restaurants. And like my wife, when he's going somewhere, he figures out, okay, in that place I'm going, where am I going to eat? So want to pick his brain on some of his great meals around the world and in Vancouver. And then Calvin will also dive deeper into some of the conversations around parenting, around the work that we're doing. And I look forward to having that next conversation with you down the road.
That sounds good. I'm still learning and reading and taking courses. I just downloaded a new course from the Gottman Institute from Seattle on emotional coaching for kids.
Oh, great.
That's the next thing that I have on my docket right now, and be happy to talk about and share what I've learned next time with you.
Perfect. We'll talk then. Thank you very much, Calvin.
All right. Have a great evening.
Bye, buddy. Thank you for joining us on The Pursuit of Learning. Make sure